I'm really pleased to introduce Chris Ball, who's going to be talking about open source accessible hardware, something that we believe in very deeply at Drone Music. Chris has been part of the DMLab community. We were trying to figure it out before, but it's quite a long time, hasn't it? Yeah. It's made many accessible instruments of many different kinds and worked.
So DMLab Northwest was started up sometime around 2016, 2015, that kind of time. I've been going since then.
Yeah, absolutely. So please give a warm welcome to Chris Ball.
Hello everyone, so my name's Chris Ball. I'm a middle-aged man wearing a red jumper, black trousers, brown shoes, sort of a scruffy beard, which is traditional for engineers. So I want to talk today about making the audio tech, the accessible tech that we have cheaper, which is something that I'm fairly passionate about and have been for a while. So if we've got the slides up, yeah, you can go to the first slide. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a creative technologist since around 2015. I've been doing that as a job for about 10 years. What that means is I take artists' requirements, the things they want to make, and I make them possible. And that's started as a hobby making musical interfaces. So I transitioned from making music to making musical interfaces to making anything out of electronics or software that I could. So that's one of my jobs. So I make installations like the ones you see here. You see on the screen, there's like a large mechanical glowing sphere. That's an installation I made very recently called Solaris, which talks about the life of a star. Just below that, there's like a complicated hall of mirrors in a glowing room, and there's a projection in the center on the floor. That's an installation I made called Particle Shrine, which takes cosmic rays and makes them into music and light. And just on the right here, we've got a picture of a bag full of technology. And that's the kind of technology that we use at one of my other jobs. So I work for an organization called Omni Music in Stockport, and we run sessions very similar to the ones Kalina was talking about before. So we believe that music should be, access to music should be for everyone. So we're an organization that works at doing that, and we like to use technology in much the same ways. So I've put Inventor up there on the slides because I also work for an inventions company, which is something I won't go into too much detail, but it means that I have experience of the commercial practice of creating things. So could you get the next slide, please? So at Omni Music, I manage all their music technology. I don't actually do a lot of the session facilitation or delivery or helping people set things up, but I do look after the tech we have and make sure that the tech we have is suitable for everyone that needs it. So sometimes we'll get someone whose needs aren't being met by what we've got. So it'd be my job to find something that's suitable. Like, for example, in the past, we did buy composers for exactly that purpose because we had a wheelchair user, an electric wheelchair user. We thought it'd be the perfect thing for them. I think they actually just wanted an electric guitar, so it wasn't necessarily the best choice, but it did meet their needs. Like last year, or beginning of this year actually, I was doing a program called Community Tech by an organization called Power to Change. I was doing that for Omni Music. It's why they hired me in the first place. And what that program was for was research to find tech that was suitable for your organization. And it was just research. So we just had to spend the time thinking about what tech our organization needed. During that research, there were a lot of things that came up, but the two main things that we focused on or found that people have problems with were audio localization for digital instruments. So when you're playing like an iPad, where is the sound coming from? Is it coming from the speaker over there? Or is it coming from the iPad itself? Is it too quiet? So that was easily solved, it turns out, by just buying mini rigs, some little powerful speakers that you could put with the instrument. You could feel the instrument playing. So that was a nice, easy win. But the other thing which came up quite a lot is that accessible tech and accessible music tech are expensive. Quite a lot of the things you buy, they're way more expensive than acoustic instruments, which sounds crazy in a way. You can buy a really cheap plastic trombone for a couple of £100, or you can buy a violin, a starter violin, not a great violin, but it could be £80. You know, it won't be very much. But that kind of thing doesn't exist in the accessible music tech world. I'm going to hopefully talk a bit about why that is. So if we could have the next slide, please. So just to quickly cover what's out there, we've got sort of the very high-end, expensive stuff that is very novel, like sound beams, which are great. They're great fun. They're like an instrument that you can just like interact with like an invisible beam and play the invisible beam, which is great fun. It's not an instrument that you can develop a lot on because there's no physical feedback from it, but it is a good fun instrument and it's well thought out in the way it's made. There's other things like Mimu gloves and the Arcana strum. They're expensive, they're well made, they're well designed, but they are expensive. There's also now, in the last few years, a load of cheaper devices that are sort of used in lots of different ways, and they can be used in lots of different settings. So these are things like the Arcana strum, Oddball, or Cosmo buttons, which are sort of Bluetooth buttons that you can interact with, and they have like a sensitivity, like a proximity sensing on them. The Oddball, which you saw before, again, these are all great things. I'm not criticizing them, but quite often they come locked to an app, so you can't use them in other ways. If you wanted to connect your Oddball to Ableton, it's sort of technically possible, but it has recently become more difficult for some reason. Or the Arcana strum is actually a pure MIDI controller, but it works best with their app. So just a little bit about why it's so expensive. Have the next slide. So yeah, just quickly, it's normally made by small companies. So small runs of things are more expensive. They're made with injection molded parts because they want the best possible quality, which means when you make injection molded stuff, you have to make a mold, and those molds cost thousands. And so they inject plastic into them, and they make really nice parts. But if you're only making 100 of them, it's a really expensive way to make plastic parts. These things have to be certified for sale. So I'm not criticizing that either. Things should be safe. If you sell an electronic device, it needs to be proven to be safe, especially in the EU. And another possible reason that accessible tech might be so expensive is that quite often the purchasing of that tech is funded, and the companies that sell it know it's funded. So they know that they can ask maybe a slightly higher price than they would. I should add that you should maybe not take all of this as gospel, because the truth is probably even more complex than I've laid out. Anyway, going back to Omni Music, if you go to the next slide, please. Going back to Omni Music and that program, one of the things that was sort of missing from the kit that I was developing, well, I was looking for a simple way to connect all our accessibility switches and play MIDI through them. And there wasn't anything out there. And I spoke to a few people, and they said, oh, we use this box. It's made by this guy, basically. And he charges £200 for a MIDI box. And I was like, okay, that's pretty reasonable in the grand scheme of things. But I think it could be cheaper. So just an example, the ones that you can get out there. So this one in the bottom left is a jack switch. It is a well-made, well-designed little bit of kit. It takes accessibility switches. Oh, sorry, I should probably talk about what an accessibility switch is. So these come in all shapes and forms, but they're basically just triggers. They're just buttons that can trigger something, and lots of devices out there use them. If someone can only just move a bit, whatever that movement is, they can probably move a bit onto a button. So they're usually bright, they're usually heavy, they're usually well-made. They come in different forms, so there's foot-activated ones that are very large. Got something like that there. And you get much smaller ones. You get ones which could be activated by breath or by an eye blink, very sensitive ones like that. But these all need to be connected to something to work, and ideally to a computer if you want to make music in a music tech kind of way. So, yeah, that's what this box is for, is to connect those switches to your computer, get them making MIDI. So these switch boxes, they could make MIDI, or they could make key presses, like keyboard presses, or they could make gamepad controls. If you wanted to play games, you can get boxes that do that exact thing, but you know, they'll press X on an Xbox controller, or that equivalent. So just to point out this other one that's down here, we've got one that's made by Praetorian, again, very well thought out. It has 6 inputs for buttons, and those can be connected to do various like key presses, like space and enter, that kind of thing. But they're all in the region of £100 to £200 at least. And there are other companies that make them. I think Soundbeam make one as part of their kit, or used to. That was also quite expensive. But one of the first things I did making a MIDI instrument was making a switch trigger something on a computer. Like it's a cheap and easy thing to do. It's you know, very little wiring, and it's 10 minutes of programming. And these days, the things that you can buy for £10 would astound you, like if you know what they're capable of. So I knew I could make something much cheaper and potentially much better. So if you could have the next slide, please. So we can make our own, and it doesn't take a lot of parts, and it doesn't take a lot of complexity. And I'll just take you through the parts quickly. We have on the left here our microcontroller. This is the brains. It's actually a surprisingly powerful bit of kit for £7.50. It can connect to Wi-Fi. It can do Bluetooth. It can, they can talk directly to each other if you want them to. And I'm just describe what I'm pointing at. It's like a little black circuit board. It has a USB-C socket on it. It has like lots of little technical things going on. It's generally black and gold though. In the middle is a circuit board. And this is the bit that you might not have access to easily. But luckily, I've been designing circuit boards for a long time. And this is a very simple circuit board. So just to describe it, it's sort of like a green, half rectangle, half circular shape. And it has lots of yellow pads all over it. There's a place for each of the parts to go, and it's outlined in white. Okay. And the final parts that we need are just mini jack connectors. And these are really cheap. These are, you know, pennies. They're 5p each or something like that. So for that cost, we can make something that does the job of something that costs £200. And it will do it better. You can connect it to Wi-Fi. You can connect it to Bluetooth. So that's exactly what I made. If we could have the next slide. Oh, that's me unplugging it. So that's the insides of the device when it's fully assembled. Just to describe it, it's the green circuit board that I described before with all of the parts attached to it. And there's a USB cable running into it now. So that's what I've got with me here. It's got an extra rectangle on it that you can see, a little rectangle of black and white card. That's actually an antenna that this comes with. So if you do want to use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, it uses that antenna. And you might also notice, if I could have the next slide, that it's in a little case. That case is not injection molded, that's 3D printed, which makes a lot of sense if you're only making 10 or 100 of something. So that 3D printed case probably takes 20 minutes to print because of the way it's been designed. So I'll just quickly go through some of the features. It might get a bit dry now because I need to outline the benefits of this. But yes, it's a USB MIDI device. When you plug it into your computer, it says, hello, I deal with music. I'm going to send you musical notes now. You can, by default, it outputs a C major scale. So if I plugged a switch into the first input, that would be C, the next one would be D, the next one would be E, and so on. You can reconfigure that though. It defaults to a C major because that's what most people might want to use, but if you wanted it to play a C minor in general, then you could change that third note. If you wanted it to play louder in general when you press the button, then you can change that too. And there's a bunch of other things you can change about the way it works. It's all been programmed in Arduino, which is a common language or tool set for making things. I've used that because it's something that lots of makers use out there. So hopefully other people will come in and they might go, I don't like the way that bit works. I'm going to make it work this way instead. And hopefully people can do that and then share their work. And all the 3D parts that I've made for this are designed in a piece of software called OpenSCAD. What that isn't important, but it is free so that anyone could download it and maybe change parts or maybe make the case bigger or thicker or more sturdy, whatever they need to. So I'll just show you a quick image of it being used. If I go to the next slide. So I've made 5 or 6 of these and sent them to a school in Oslo, no, sorry, not in Oslo, in Tromsø in Norway, where they are using them. If you just have a look in the bottom right corner, you'll see the box attached to the back of the screen. Just to describe the image, it's a very complicated classroom that's full of accessible music tech and full of people using it. And just the device I've made just stuck to the back of a monitor in the bottom left. They're only using it for one switch, for one person, but that might be all it needs. If you're only using it for one switch for one person, and that costs you £250, then you might rather spend £12 or something much less. So just to talk about the next steps, what I want to do with this, or this process. So I want this project to be fully open source and open hardware, meaning I want everyone to be able to see the code and how it works. I want everyone to be able to make this themselves if they're inclined to. More than that, I want people to be able to just order it for themselves. There are now websites like JLC PCB who will assemble circuit boards for you. So you could order the full completed circuit board ready to go. You could also order the 3D printed parts ready to go. So I wouldn't be selling it to you directly. You could just buy it for yourself. I want to add more features. I want it to use Bluetooth MIDI as well. I want it to be fully wireless, have batteries, that kind of thing. I want it to be able to be changeable and not just do MIDI, to be able to output key presses or appear as a gamepad or a joystick so that people can use it in more ways. Because of the hardware I've chosen, there are many possibilities that we could use. Many ways we could change this. So, if we can have the next slide, I will be rushing to the end here. So I've also made, in a similar vein, in a similar way, a very cheap switch, which is actually what we've been using as mic weights tonight, because I brought loads with me. I'll just hand a few of these out for people to play with. Just after some feedback on how they click, whether they feel like you've got some good feedback. I've made these also to be incredibly cheap. So this is something that 3D prints in an hour. I'm just gonna pass these out. Something that 3D prints in an hour. It's a little black base, maybe about 8 centimeters across, with a bright orange top. And this clicking noise is me pressing it. But yes, these switches can run to £100 for a really good one. And it's not unusual for them to be £50, £60. Which they're made that well for a reason, and they cost that much for a reason, but not every setting needs them to be super crazy durable or super crazy well made. This might be good enough for you. So how you can use them. So I haven't actually got as far with this bit as I'd like, but I've begun the process of putting everything together and putting it online. And you can find it at my GitHub, which is at github.com/Chris Ball. GitHub is like a way of developers and programmers and people who make things sharing what they've made and allowing other people to work on it, which is what also I would like to happen. So if you have an interest in any of these things and you would like to help make this stuff or make cheap tech with me, then get in touch. You can, Tim's expressed an interest in using these as part of the accessible musical instrument collection. And you can also email me. So my email address is chrisballprojects@gmail.com. Yeah, that's pretty much me. We have the last slide just while we do the last bit. This is just some other organizations that make technology cheap. I'm not the only person that's thought of this. These are a few of the others out there doing the same thing. So maybe have a look at them. But yeah, that's everything. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. Round of applause.